Good afternoon, folks. This is the fourth session of the Maine Master Community Composter course, brought to you live from the same set in Rockport, Maine, presented by Mark King, Organics Management Specialist from the Division of Materials Management, Maine Department of Environmental Protection. The FRC is a group of like-minded individuals with a goal in mind, minimizing wasted food. Built this glass house. How to get involved? Reach out to us, mrrafrc@mra.net. Find out how. We're working on a survey. Hopefully we'll get that out to you soon. I'm not going to talk about the waste diversion grant much. The deadline was yesterday, but Mark's going to go into that a little bit in the afternoon session. And just a little bit of the facts and figures there. Obviously give away, or going to give away some of the things you can do with it. And the certification for this course would demonstrate technical ability, which is required when applying for that permit by rule from the Maine DEP. That will be available after number 5, which we're going to do in May. So you get the certificate. What you could do is you could take the test, and then you can pay us for the test. And we'll have a few trinkets. We've got a thumb drive planned with a lot of data on there for you. So be a nice thermometer to test your pile. Has to be a 3-foot thermometer to get a good reading on it. And we have a discount if you want to have a couple people in your organization taking the certification. So just a quick rundown. February 26th, we talked about the feedstock and the recipe. Third class was compost methods and systems. And if you missed any of them, go to the mra.net, and you should be able to watch them all day long if you like. And the fourth class today, building and maintaining your compost pile management. For those not here, hopefully you can watch it later. In the 5th video, like I said, talk about feedstock assessment, recipe development, pile building. We're hoping to be able to dig into someone's pile, and Mark will give it a good once over to see what's going on with it. And we have the sticker available. We're thinking about offering those for sale if someone wants to start a little, not part of our lending library to have some cards. We should be able to get some of those for you. And Mark King's contact, Organic Management Specialist. Here you go. And you'll be able to find this anytime you go back and look at the video. All food, obviously, too good to waste. And we're on to the program over Mark. He's got a nice big setup for us.
All right, thank you, Vic. All right, so before we get into that, though, I wanted to talk about the last class. We talked about compost systems. We started with the simple backyard systems. Then we advanced it up to the Maryland bin systems, where we started dealing with a larger amount of material. Then we got to the static pile, then the turned windrows. So the one key thing to remember is you match your system to what, can somebody grab that door, please? You match your system to whatever you're trying to accomplish. If you're a school system, a couple of backyard bins will work perfectly for you. If you're a prison system, for example, you might actually go either with a static pile or an in-vessel system. Like the Maine Department of Corrections actually got a waste diversion grant from us, and they're using tumblers, rotating drums, in order to do their system. So the key, though, is figure out how much volume that you want to deal with, and then make the system as complicated as you can manage. The more activity that you do, the more you turn it, the more you work it, the more apt you're going to get some good stuff out of it in the end. So that's the key thing there. All right. So we also talked about in the biology class, there are 4 major things necessary for compost to occur. The first is the carbon. That's the actual amendment. That's the source that the microbes use for food and fuel to fuel their processes. Nitrogen is the other part of the recipe. So we have carbon and nitrogen. Nitrogen is what the microbes use to make more. It's proteins, amino acids, things like that. So as they break this material down and build it up into these complex compounds that become compost, they actually also make more microbes in the process. So if you have really good carbon source and lots of good nitrogen and it's matched perfectly, you'll always have lots and lots of microbial activity in your pile, provided you also have good oxygen, which is the next one. Pile requires 5%, and we also use only 5%. We take in 21, but we give off 16. So the idea is that we only need 5% to fuel our metabolic processes, just like the microbes. And then finally, probably one of the most important factors, not just in thriving for the pile, but also in what can cause the pile to go wrong, is moisture. You need roughly 55%. We talked about doing that squeeze test in a previous class. The idea is you grab a handful of compost mix and you give it a good hard squeeze. And if water comes out of your knuckles, lots of it, it's too wet. If you open your hand and it crumbles to the ground, it's too dry. But if you open your hand and it feels like a wet sponge, it's perfect. And that's 55%. However, if you get too much, it'll fill the air spaces in the pile, and the pile will choose to go anaerobic without oxygen. And that's a recipe for volatile organic acids and other odorous compounds. If you go too dry, there's no room for the microbes to live, and pile activity ceases completely. So those are some key criteria. You need all four of those in perfect harmony. So when we're talking about basic feedstock management, we have to do a few things. When you mix two materials together, there's two factors to consider. The size of it, or called the texture, the particle size. The closer they are to each other, the better they mix. Kind of makes sense, right? The other is the moisture content. If you mix something really, really dry with something really, really wet, you're going to get lots of clumps. So we try to get things as compatible as we can, both moisture and texture size. So when we blend them, they want to blend thoroughly and create one material that it's hard to distinguish what the original parts were. The next thing is we figure out how we're going to mix it. If we're dealing with an aerated static pile system, which we talked about in the previous class, you have to have a perfect blend because you're not turning it again during that process. And as you blow air through, if your mixture is not really good, air is going to find cheat channels through the pile, and the rest of the pile is not going to get properly aerated. So good mixing. And we're going to talk about some different options there. And then we want to talk about how to build the pile. Certain piles you can build really big, and certain piles you can't. You can't exceed 8 feet because of the way the materials are. They're too wet, too heavy, and they'll compress down on the center of the pile, which is where all the activity is happening. So we want to keep that aerobic. So we always try to build our piles appropriately. And then we'll talk a little bit about aerated static pile and turn window, how to build those and why we do them the way we do it. And aeration strategies. Some we blow air in, others we make the pile, as the word is porosity, as open to airflow as possible. And then moisture management, which is part of troubleshooting as well, because moisture is one of our greatest problem makers. And finally, we'll do some troubleshooting. So that's kind of what we have set up for you today. So the very first thing is the reason why we grind material is we want to get the particle sizes similar, but there's some other things that happen. Number one, the smaller the particle size, the greater the surface area, the more room for microbes to work on it, right? But if you grind it too small, then what happens is that when you get it wet, it turns into fudge and no air can get through. So there is a certain grind that you want to kind of reach to. I like to see my initial components between 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch in particle size. I think those blend pretty well. So you want that surface area for microbial activity. You want better mixing because the particle sizes are more compatible. And also, when you grind it, you kind of open it up all over so it facilitates its breakdown. So the microbes can really do a good job. And definitely, you want the fine for liquid absorption and surface area for the microbes to feed. And you want the coarse for pile structure, keeping the pile to look like a pile, plus allowing airflow. So that porosity. So here's some grinding methods. First, you have a tub grinder, which you've seen. It's like a bowl of parquet on a spinner. And most of the time, my experience with those is that they toss more stuff out of the bucket than stays in it. So, but if that's what you got, that's what you got. A hammer mill is a very aggressive. I'll have some pictures of these in a minute. But with the thing about a hammer mill is you can actually have multiple things going in at once, and it just kind of works it all together. Tub grinder tends to get overwhelmed. A rotary shredder, there's a couple of different ones, but the benefit of a shredder is that it absolutely incorporates everything together. So when we deal with shredders, I add carbon, then I add the stuff I want to, the liquid I want to compost and the nitrogen, then I add more carbon and turn the shredder on, and it mixes them together super well. So they're great for mixing and pulverizing. And then farm equipment. People don't really think about that too much, but the flail mower, you can actually raise that up and it becomes a mixer. It makes a flat pile that you then have to take a bucket to turn into a round shape, but it still works. Same with forage and bedding choppers. The whole idea is that they help to do the mixing piece, and then you still have to work with your tractor bucket. So this is a hammer mill, and it's part of a shredder. And those guys spin each other. You've probably seen it on Facebook where they put like a propane tank in there or a motorcycle, and you watch it get all. It's oddly kind of fun to watch, right? You see this motorcycle get all crushed up, but that's what it does. Is it just rips and tears. This is a tub grinder. This is an old one, but this is how they normally are. And the idea is that drum spins, and down on the bottom are a series of blades that do the cutting. And as it spins around, it causes that material to constantly be tossed to the center through centrifugal force. And the end result is that you get a pretty decent grind, but you also get a lot of overflow. So you got to have the right speed so as it doesn't cover you. And then this is just a typical farm manure spreader. And once again, it works great. You turn it to a low PTO though. I tried using it when it was at high speed and you get covered in compost. So you don't want that. After you've got the particle sizes compatible, the next thing is to do the mixing. And really honestly, I told you in the biology class, your first chance to control odors was to receive the material and put it into dry carbon and then cover it, because liquid is where the odors are found. Same thing with mixing. Now that we've got this material amended in a pile, when we mix it, we start that intimate contact and we actually start the real composting process, because we're now providing the spaces for the microbes to have moisture, food, and air so they can get to work. So we talked about all the different parts already. So we're now just putting them in the perfect scenario. And when you mix it, it takes care of aerobic problems. So if you ever have a pile that's really stinky, the first solution is to go ahead and mix it, turn it. Then that'll help solve that problem. Some of the mixing options out there include a front end loader. Every facility has one. It becomes one of the best tools for composting. If it's your only one for your whole facility, it can be time limiting, because when you need it, it may be being used for something else. So a lot of facilities will have a dedicated loader just for composting, but that's if you have the luxury of the extra cost and a second loader. So then you have these commercial mixers out. I'm a real huge fan of these batch mixers. They're called TMR wagons. Farms use them. They haul them behind the tractor and you put in grain and other feed. And then you have two augers that move the material like this, and then a big wheel that fluffs it so it all gets mixed. And then you have a little door that lets it out the side, and they drive along a trough and they'll feed the animals with this mixing blend. Well, lo and behold, when farmers start to see them get a little overused, they'll buy a brand new one, because they always want to have a good, clean one for the animals. So you can pick those up for around $6,000. And it's a great mixing unit to start a compost operation. That's what we use at the compost school. The other option is what's called a continuous feed mixer. And that's where you have a gigantic mixing device and you have two hoppers on the side with conveyors. One side takes in nitrogen, one side takes in carbon, and then it blends it in the center, and out comes the compost mix. That's what Hawk Ridge Compost Facility had in Unity Plantation. So very, very expensive, a lot more investment. Then you can do things like a windrow turner. This is an automated device that you pull behind a tractor, or you actually can buy one that straddles the compost windrow. And the end result is that's like an ice fishing auger on its side. As it spins, it kicks material up. And then the way that the top is shaped is like a trapezoid. It kicks it down and makes a perfect parabolic shape, which is what's good for composting. And then finally, the farm equipment that you have, the manure spreader and the farm tractor, both do it. As far as moisture adjustment, if you want to keep your pile on the dry side, let's say you got some really super wet material, a couple things you can do is you can spread it out, turn it. You can mix it with drier material, usually probably the most common thing. You'll find out within the first week. So if you do mix in dry stuff, you won't set your clock back too far. To moisten it, you can irrigate. I will tell you that most compost piles are hydrophobic, and they don't like to have water infiltrate them, so they tend to shed it off the sides. That's one of the good things about a compost windrow, is that it's set to shed rainwater. However, if you need it inside, you can flatten the top of the windrow, and that will encourage water to go down inside. Or you can place a soaker hose on top. And what a soaker hose does is it continues soaking until the top surface gets so wet that it starts to let moisture in. So, and that's a good thing. So when you build your standard compost pile, if you're using material that standards, things like, let's say you're working with fish gurry and horse manure. That's one of my favorite blends. You don't want the pile to exceed 8 feet. When it gets above 8 feet, that's when you start having that compression on the core, which takes away the oxygen and makes it hard for the pile to work. And you want a 2-to-1 slope. So if it's 6 feet high, 12 feet wide. If it's 8 feet high, 16 feet wide. And that 2-to-1 slope is what allows the pile to shed rainwater. Now, a lot of facilities in Maine use a small windrow turner, and their piles are only 3 feet tall by 6. And they're very prone to being hit with heavy rains. So they will apply a compost cover on top, which is like a felt that allows gases to escape, but does not let water penetrate. And they'll protect their piles from excessive precipitation. The only exception to the pile height rule is leaves. You can have leaves 10, 12, 15 feet tall because they just don't have that structure until they're really old. Once they start to get old and they start to curl up and they start to have some density to them, then that's when you want to break the piles down. But fresh leaves, pile really high. The other options for aeration, as far as field compost piles, are turning, either turning with a tractor or a windrow turning machine, or you can introduce, well, once you turn the pile, oxygen is introduced just by the natural turning process. Or you can have a situation where they're inside a bunker or closer to your facility and you have forced aeration, similar to that cart that I have out front there. And the idea is that you put a plenum underneath the pile, then you build it over that plenum. And that way, when the air comes into the pipe, it spreads sideways and then up through the pile. And we'll talk about that in a second. So here's a farm-based system where he's doing horse manure, he's doing sawdust shavings, and he's doing bedded cow manure. This is an organic dairy farm in Sydney. It's owned by the Bragg family. And he just does the initial mix this way. Then he uses a windrow turner to finish the work. One of the major problems with using a front-end loader, especially if you have a young or inexperienced driver of the loader, is that they want to do the best job they can, so they drive up onto the sides of the pile. Well, we learned from the biology class that the majority of breathing that the pile does is from its sides. So when you drive up on there, you compact those areas and make it very difficult for the compost pile to breathe, so you can actually kill the activity. So we try to keep people off of those piles. So building a turned windrow. The first thing that we do is we layer the material, okay? Start with a light base, usually sawdust shavings or horse manure. Then you put your wetter, heavier material in the middle. That could be straight cow manure. It could be chicken manure. It could be dogfish. It could be any type of fish at all. And then you put a lighter material on top. Now, once you've done that, you then turn it with the windrow turner, or you turn it with your bucket. And that is what helps you form that windrow, okay? And I'll show you what that looks like. Here's an example right here. You can see where they had a light layer on the bottom, a fairly heavy, dense layer in the middle, and then a light layer on top. And then what this guy is going to do is he's just going to go through with his windrow turner and blast it all together. And the really cool thing about that is that as it kicks that up, you notice it flicks it both ways, but it hits those sides and it kicks it down, so it makes this perfect parabolic shape. And that's what a windrow turner will do for you. There's a disadvantage of a windrow turner, especially if it's a haul behind the tractor. because you have to have alleyways for it to travel, and that takes away the amount of piles you can put on your pad. If you use a front end loader, you still have to have maneuverability for the front end loader, so that also takes away from the amount of space you can use on your pad. The only thing that allows you to put piles right next to each other is an aerated static pile or a compost windrow that you have a straddle turner that started about $250,000. So not necessarily the first thing people think about. A couple of other things. When you turn a front end loader, people love doing it, but you know what? If your windrow is 500 feet long, you can spend most of the day turning that pile. If you have a windrow turner, you can go through that pile in 15 minutes, even at the slowest speed possible. So what people don't do when they start this business is they don't give time for their time. They don't think about that as a monetary value, but it is. So you've got to think about that when you're figuring out your business plan. But my general rule is if you get over 500 cubic yards a year of processing, it may be time to start thinking about the possibility of some sort of automated turn or adding another system, like maybe have half of it aerated static pile, because you don't need to turn that. And then have a turn windrow that you can manage as well. So what a turner does is it physically agitates material. Now, that's a really good thing. It busts it up, it mixes it up, it adds oxygen. However, in doing all this mixing and busting, it also reduces that particle size. And if you turn too often, you can actually collapse your pore spaces in your pile. So when I work with farmers who don't want to take temperatures on a daily basis, who just want a general rule of thumb, I tell them turn your compost pile once a week and no sooner. And then if you feel like it needs to be turned sooner, give me a call and I'll come look, because we don't want them to overturn. If you use a front end loader, especially if the material is fresh and wet, every time you turn it and you drop it down, it wants to form these things called coconuts. It looks like a brown coconut, but inside it's stinky and gooey. So you've got to find a way to break those or keep incorporating those. So with a front end loader, you're prone to more cloppy, goopy balls. So you've just got to be on top of that. So the advantages of turning, it doesn't require a thorough mixing at the outset. Some people just like to throw it all together and just make it happen. Pile problems can be corrected on the fly. That's the best part about a turned windrow. If I'm taking temperatures and I have one that's got a dead section, I just take my loader and I scoop it up, flip it a couple times, and it comes back to life. With an aerated static pile system, especially if they're all together, you don't have that luxury. You've got to take the whole thing apart and start over. So that can be a problem. You don't have to spend a lot of money because you've already got that piece of equipment already. So it's great if you're starting out and don't want to spend a lot of money. And it's definitely ideally suited for use in most rural settings. Now, the picture on the left is a typical loader, but the one on the right is a really cool system. It's Earth Saver. It's from Wiscasset, Maine. And the tractor that runs it is about the same size as my John Deere lawnmower. But it has a special hydraulic output that the PTO off the lawnmower cranks that up, and it has enough energy to drive that system. The pile's only 3 feet tall, but it makes really great windrows. So it's a cool system. Now, some of the disadvantages of turning, it does require a larger footprint, especially if you have a loader or a tow behind system. We talked about the pile structure issues if you turn too often, but as you get bigger, you spend more time turning and less time enjoying your life. So that's what the front end loader does for you. The mechanized turners really speed things up, but they're expensive unless you go to a farm supply store and buy one that, somebody had and they turned in, or one that needs to be refurbished. We picked up a lot of stuff for the compost school for pennies on the dollar because we were willing to buy something that was all beat up and repair it ourselves. So I've already talked about this a little bit. The poor mixing forms the coconuts. The piles do take longer to turn. But the biggest thing is that a valuable piece of equipment is tied up. And if there's a lot of need for it certain times of the year, it can be troublesome if everybody needs to have it at once. So sometimes that's a good thing. Whereas now the turner is very expensive. It does create a much more uniform blend, but it's a one-trick pony. all it does is turn piles. You're not going to you might mix some things with it. You might get creative and maybe grind a stump or something, but you're not going to get the utility you do from a front end loader. So it becomes kind of a cash cow in some ways. But the advantage of the turner is that you can actually put some dry material on top and work it in and change that recipe right away. So that's a nice feature. And like I said, you go from 5 to 6 hours with a loader to 15 minutes with a turner. So that's some people think that's worth it in and of itself. But the offset models do require more space, and the front end loader requires more turnaround space. Now let's talk about the other side. This is where a lot of people that are doing food right now are very excited. They've been telling me they want to do these systems. I brought the little garbage cart with the aeration system to show you that you can do it as small a scale as possible. But what they find is that you definitely need to have some sort of piping. The stronger the piping, the better. If you're dealing with piles that are 6 to 8 feet tall, you want to use the same stuff they put in landfills. It's HDPE tubing, and they actually already have holes drilled in them, but they are fairly expensive. However, they last forever, and they do not ever get compressed. I've seen that 10-inch green PVC pipe that looks rugged as all get out, flatten like a pancake after one season of use. It gets hot, it starts to get malleable, and then the weight of the compost just squashes it. This landfill stuff, absolutely not. So you lay that pipe out, then you put a layer of coarse bulking agent over that piping. That's your plenum to let it flow sideways and up through, okay? You deposit the pre-mixed compost mixture on top. You cover the entire mixture with 6 to 10-inch thick layer of finished compost peat or bulking. Now, what's really important is finished compost and peat. The reason why I add that to the top as odor control is the C-to-N ratio of the finished compost and the peat is around 19 to 1. Most finished compost, when it's done, it starts at 30, 20 to 30 to 1. When it's all done, it comes down to about 19 to 1. So if I add this material and then I decide to turn the pile, I'm not going to upset my recipe. But if I put 6 inches of sawdust, which is 400 to 1, on my perfectly balanced pile, when I turn that in, I've now skewed it to the wrong side. Now the C-to-N ratio is too high. So that's why we use either finished compost or peat as the major two. However, if you're in a situation where you have odor problems and you're really stressed out because they're about to shut you down, you can put wood chips on. And the reason why you can put wood chips on, even though they have a high C-to-N ratio, they have no surface area. So they're not going to upset the pile. The only problem is that when you turn it and mix it, you're going to have to screen those out in the end because those wood chips are not contributing, but they're going to be part of the final blend. So, and that's something that if you get a process started, we can talk about. Then you attach the blower. So let's take a look at this thing. All right, so here we go. So you see you got the pipes down there. In this case, it's 3 pipes. And a big pile of wood chips is the air plenum. These pipes have holes drilled in both sides going this way. So they're going laterally, not straight up, right? And the reason why they don't go straight up is because particles will fill in the holes and then they'll clog it. So we go to the side. And then you put your compost mixture on top of that. And then you put your cover material, which is your biofilter, like 6 to 8 inches of finished compost or peat. Now, let me show you. This is our site in Lisbon Falls, Maine. That's the landfill piping I talked to you about on the upper left. The middle is the pipe being laid out. I think that chamber is about 40 feet long by 20 feet wide. He puts his pipe in there. He covers it with a bed of chips, and that's his plenum. Then he blends his compost material and drops it directly on top of that, which I'll show you in a second. The lower left-hand picture is actually the blowers, and they're all on timers. They come on for 15 minutes every 2 to 3 hours. That's the aeration schedule that he uses. Okay, so let's get more here. Starts out with sawdust shavings, really clean, really dry. They're in a building, so there's no moisture. The precipitation is all shed. He uses animal bedding, which is horse manure, cow manure, and what's called bedded pack. I told you in previous ones that I love horse manure because it comes out of the stalls really hot, really energetic, really ready to go. Bedded pack is the same thing. It's cow manure that's been on a sawdust shavings bed, but instead of getting rid of it each time, they mix it and they allow it to aerate. So it's actually hot active composting material. So all those go together, and he mixes in lobster bodies that he gets from a couple of the seafood producers across the state. And he puts them in this real Augie mixer, and in the lower bottom. And I told you that that's a mixer that has a paddle that does this, so the material is constantly recycled to the top, and then two augers that oppose each other. And as the material runs by each other, they cut it into smaller pieces. So the idea is that it gets a thorough blend, which is important because when it goes on there, when he builds his piles, he wants to have as good a mixture as possible so the air is going to flow evenly through it. And you can see right there that that's about 6 to 7 feet tall. And that's exactly what you want. And it's about 12 to 14 feet wide. And that one pipe is able to keep that whole compost pile working great. And this guy is Little River Compost, and his material has won awards. It's that good. So that's something to shoot for. Now, there's two ways that these systems work. There's a timing system and there's a heat response system. The Beltsville method was basically that the timer was used to either be on all the time or on for a certain amount of minutes for each hour. Beltsville has become the preferred method over time, but when it was first introduced, another group came out of Rutgers University and said, we've got a better system. Our blowers are only going to come on when the material is below 110 or above 140. Because the idea is that if it's low, we're going to lift it up with a little bit of air. If it's too hot, we're going to cool it down so it comes to optimal. And it's just that process doesn't always work the way that it should. Most people that do these, they want something simple that they can set it and forget it. And so the Beltsville method has become the preferred method. So some of the advantages, you have much better odor control because when you blow through it during the first couple of weeks is when you're most apt to have issues with it being anaerobic. And if you're constantly blowing air in, it doesn't have a chance to go anaerobic. So that's one super duper advantage, right? Smaller footprint, you can put those piles right next to each other so you can fit more piles on the same pad. Okay, it's a better process control as long as the mixture is perfect. And then finally, it is suited for use in a covered compost facility. That's where it thrives because you're not worrying about smacking beams and stuff with your bucket as you're turning. Now, some of the disadvantages, though, excessive aeration may dry the piles out or it make the pile find air channels it prefers. And those are the only ones that get air. The stuff in between stays nice and wet. So the first time you turn it, it's a huge odor problem. So that can be an issue. Pile must often be broken down and reformed to ensure even composting. Other states that still do biosolids composting, the standard is that you have to compost for 21 days and cure for 21 days. So 42 days of active work. During both of those phases, the pile has to reach 3 days at 131 degrees Fahrenheit in order to reach pathogen kill value for the EPA. So the pile, blowers and monitoring systems and piping can be expensive, especially if you're going for the cheaper piping, because replacing piping every single year can be a problem, especially if there's any chain disruptions, right? Like this tariffs are causing things like that. So I like the landfill ones. Mark Garter down in Lisbon Falls has stuff that he's had since 1993. So, and it still works perfectly today. That's a good thing. So the way to overcome any major aeration problems is starting out with a really good mixture and making sure that if you don't have a good mix or if you notice it's failing, instead of saying, I'm going to ride it out for a week, just see what happens, break it down and start over early. If it's a couple days, so you missed a few days, who cares? But if you wait 2 weeks, now you've got a big mess that you may or may not be able to revive. So just don't go there. All right, so moisture management wise, you need to maintain 55% moisture. That's a good squeeze test. As stated earlier, the moisture is the home for the microbes. If it's greater than 65%, it's just an airflow issue, and you just don't want that. And the simplest ways, we have a material in Maine called apple pumice. It's made from pressing cider. And the cool thing about it is that it's really, really wet and it doesn't have a lot of nitrogen. So it's a great source to add to a compost pile to get moisture. The only drawback is that it has a pH of about 4.5. So you've got to definitely, if you add that to your pile, you've got to adjust it a bit. So you maybe add a little wood ash, a little lime, but that you become a mixologist basically. But it's a great wetting agent. And it is a waste that people want to get rid of. So there's always tons of it around. Okay. And then the other thing is that if it's really, really wet at the beginning and you're worried about it, just turn it more often the first couple of weeks. I always want to start out with a pile that's too wet. It's easier to dry a pile than it is to make a pile wet. And it's just the nature of the beast. It just doesn't want to accept water, but you can shed it by turning. Other things, as we said, we talked about the pile shape. You can flatten the top. You can find that a depression, that naturally formed depression, can actually result in water leaking in the pile. So you've got to constantly look to make sure your pile's not damaged in some way. Predators will sometimes dig into a fresh pile. They'll create a cavity, and when it rains, that part gets soaked and becomes dead. So you definitely want to do that. And if it's a really steep pile, it's going to shed water. So the shape is super duper important. And other things that help work are these pile covers. And I'll show you a picture here, this next slide, but they're not super expensive and they do a great job. If your pile's bigger than 6 feet, you don't need them, because a 6-foot pile, even in the worst rainstorms ever, it's only going to penetrate about 8 inches. But if the pile's 3 feet tall, there's so much more surface area for that water to soak in, and that will knock a pile out. So really, it's on the smaller piles that you want to wear those. But the other things that they do, even though the guy that runs this company says that I'm dead wrong, I think they prevent erosion, wind erosion, and evaporation from strong winds. I think they do block them. I've actually encouraged my friends in the South, especially Arizona and New Mexico, to make sure that they definitely take care of that by using these compost covers. But he says, don't sell them for that. That's not what they're for. But you know what? If it works, it works. So I'm not going to worry about it. And in the winter, they do provide insulation. But here's what they look like. So you can see that it's a good cover. It sheds rainwater, and it allows gases to escape. It's like a felt, but it's woven in such a way that large molecules of water can't get through, but air can escape. All right, so now we'll talk a little bit about pile monitoring. Everybody that gets certified in this class will get a 3-foot thermometer, which is really important. It tells you what your pile's doing. I believe you should do it every day. I believe you should take temperatures at the 1 foot, 3 foot level and compare them. After the first week, if your 1 foot and your 3 foot temperature differ by more than 20 degrees Fahrenheit, your pile is telling you it wants to be turned. So it's a really great tool. I'll answer at the end because we're kind of pressed on time. It helps you determine when the compost is market ready, and it satisfies your license requirements if you get one. All right, so most of the problems are placing your thermometer in the pile. People get excited and they jam it straight in, and it goes into the ground. And they're like, my pile isn't getting hot. What's wrong? And I show up and I stick my thermometer in, and it's 140. I'm like, guys, here's what you got to do. You got to put it in at a certain angle. They said, well, what, can you make a graphic? And so I said, yes, I will. So at standing height, you insert your thermometer at 45 degrees. I put two together. The one on the left is always 1 foot. The one on the right is always 3 foot, or the core of the pile, okay? And I let them sit for at least 2 minutes because it needs time to calibrate, unless you buy the expensive thermometer that does it in 45 seconds. But it's like an extra $60. So then you look at the two temperatures. When you first start, the outside should be hotter than the inside, always, because the outside is where the air is getting in. But as the process works and you've turned it a couple times, the pile becomes more porous, and pretty soon it'll start to flip-flop. When that happens, that's your pile saying, please turn me. So that's another time you know when the inside's hotter than the outside, it's time to turn it. The other thing that I do is I like to graph. It's sort of like a baby sonogram. I graph all my piles because that tells me what's going on. It's really super important. But as I said, you take 5 or more readings per pile and average them across the 1 foot and across the 3 foot. And take them from the same location every day. And always record weather data and chart your temperatures just to make sure things are cool. All right. So you plot the temperature data, you compare the results, and that lets you establish trends. If you have a sudden dip in temperature and it didn't rain and you don't know what caused it, turn your pile because something's not happening. If it rains 3 inches and your pile dips, it's okay. That's going to happen. And then the next day, it'll come back up when it starts to dry out. So your pile really talks to you if you let it. So other things, so we got the squeeze test for moisture, we already talked about. For odor assessment, nose. When you first start your pile, you're going to smell ammonia. It's totally cool the first week because all that nitrogen that's not being used up by the microbes is going to be blasting off into the atmosphere. After week 4 or 5, if you still smell ammonia, something is wrong. You don't have enough carbon in there. Your recipe wasn't the way that it should be. Okay. If you smell a rotting smell, that tells me the mix was not good. It tells me the pH is too low because we learned in biology when the pH is low, volatile organic acids are produced, the stinky stuff, right? Or it's too wet, or you didn't have enough carbon in the mixture. This is all troubleshooting stuff. You can tell just by the rotting smell, those 4 things need to be assessed right now, which is a cool thing because that gets you on the right page. If it's a strong odor of the original ingredients, if you smell manure in it at like week 4, you did not mix it very good because you got pockets of manure there. And that's, once again, give it a turn. Everything's really about giving it a turn. If it smells like dirt, you hit gold. You're all good. Physical appearance-wise, when you dig into it, you should see a good mixture of coarse and fine. You might start to see that band of white guys we call actinomycetes between the really active and the slowly active material. That band tells us that everything's cool. All right, so what do you need to write down? Well, you want to write down the recipe. I do that for every pile I build, just so I know. And I do it on both a weight basis and a volume basis. The volume is how I do it in the field. Then I have a spreadsheet when I get back to the office that I put those values in, and it gives me the weights, just so I can do it on both levels. Record when you turn, record if you've had any disturbances and covered it, and then when you break down and rebuild if you have to. Temperature, precipitation, and then wind direction and flow, just so you know what's impacting your pile. So what kind of tests are available out there? Well, absolutely positively, you have Sovita, which is a test that we do at the compost school, and it tells you how mature your compost is. We also have percent, we'll do a video on that one too, Vic, when we do it. You have percent oxygen, which don't buy a meter. You can tell the percent oxygen in your pile by the temperature of the pile. If the pile's 160, your oxygen's rocking. If your pile's 110 or 104, maybe she needs to be turned. So don't worry about these expensive meters because you don't need them. You don't need to worry about pH. As I told you in biology, the pile takes care of itself. So that's not an issue. And I'm a big fan of doing a bioassay. People want to do all these tests on how good their compost is. A bioassay is where you basically take your finished compost, mix it with a little bit of soil like Miracle-Gro, things like that, plant seedlings of cucumbers in there, and let them come up and see what they look like. If they all come up and they got a nice dark green color and they look lively, then your compost is perfect. If they come up and they're yellow or they're shriveled or something like that, then have it tested. And you may find that when you test it, it's got high salt or it's still active and it's got volatile organic acids. Both of those will kill plants pretty good. But so we talked about this in biology. You want a good seed-end ratio at the beginning, good moisture content, and excellent porosity. You monitor your piles. I want them daily, but if you're someone who can't do it daily, at least weekly. That'll give you some pretty good data. All right, so troubleshooting. The first thing to remember is a good site location and operations are going to take care of everything. Follow your process control, turn as the pile talks to you. Have a plan that includes proper responses to issues as they arrive. And then if you have a lot of neighbors who don't like you, keep them constantly informed. When things are going good and you tell them good things, that helps a lot. React quickly when problems arise, and then follow through with solutions. Often the simplest things prevent big problems because people smell with their eyeballs. So if you're composting in an area and you have all these trees and you think, oh, it'd be nice to cut them down, don't. Any visual barriers you have between you and your neighbors are going to take care of your odor complaints, knock them down by a great percentage. All right. So have adequate space for movement and storage of materials, good efficient flow. Always make your operation neat and clean. If you have a lot of areas of juice, cover them with good carbon source. Okay? Good stormwater management is a requirement, especially if you get a license. And then make sure that when people are delivering material, you're there and you have plenty of amendment. Don't ever let somebody deliver something in a spot where you don't have a proper bowl of amendment to catch it, because that's when problems happen. So these are the things that we look at. We talked about this in biology, but these are all the criteria that you want. You know, a good seed-end ratio, 20 to 31. 50% moisture, start out with a pH anywhere from 5.5 to 8.5, but 7's good. Good oxygen content. The bulk density of the particles should be around 800 to 1,000 pounds per cubic yard to mix well. Have a good blend and make sure that you have good hot temperatures within the first 72 hours. If not, fix it. So the things that you're going to see with your eyes, you're going to see color, texture. If you see all kinds of flies on a pile, little teeny flies, it's probably manure and it's probably not mixed as well as it could, or the pile's way too wet. Okay, so look for little flies, look for texture. When you break open a pile that's a week old, you should see stratification of the layers if it's perfect. If it all looks like a big brown, fudgy, gross thing, it's too wet and you have too much nitrogen. So you want to see these little the gradations of stuff. Smell. You smell ammonia the week 1, not a big deal. Ammonia week 4, probably a big deal. Volatile organic acids, any feedstock ingredients, and then touch it. Touch it for warmth. Feel it for moisture. You know, feel it for the density. If you can't drive your hand into it, then it's probably too dense. If it's too dense, air's not going to penetrate. So very, very simple stuff. The pile tests that are out there, I mean, there are people that will love you. You mentioned to someone that had one of these conferences on composting, you see the oxygen probe, and you mentioned, oh, how's that work? They will tell you the greatest story in the world. You don't need it. Your temperature tells you your oxygen level. Moisture sampling, you know, they'll say, I've got this moisture meter. Well, I've tested many over the years. And what I've found is that after the first time you stick it, they never work the same way again. And that to me is a waste of money. Temperature-wise, invest in a really good thermometer, a good 3-foot thermometer, because that is your best tool that you have going. And the more rugged, the thicker the stem, the more forgiving it is if you're over anxious when you shove it in and you hit a stump or a rock or something. And then, as I said, pH buffers itself. So unless you start out way whacked out, like a pH of 2 or 12, I wouldn't worry about adjusting it because the pile will buffer itself over the course of the action. So some of the compounds that are cool but also problematic, these are the byproducts during composting. You've got the nitrogen compounds, ammonia, which is the leachable form of nitrogen. It's usually in solution until the pile becomes too dry. Then it'll drive it off. Or the pH of the pile becomes higher than 8.5. Then it'll drive it off. Okay, so those are two to really worry about. Okay. Organic acids, they're produced early, especially when you have a low pH level. But here's the cool thing. They have a tremendous amount of energy in them. So as the pile starts to struggle itself out of the problem, it'll eat all those guys out because it's really good. It's like a chocolatey eclair, you know, they just mow them right down. They are short-chained, and therefore they persist on the ground and they follow topography. they follow fog, they follow river channels. So those are what go to your neighbors and make them worry about you. And everything there is fixed by turning the pile. If you have all these odors, you turn it and you're going to wake it up. You're going to create more airspace and all the VOAs are going to go away. So that's a really good thing. And then finally, the one of greatest importance are the humic compounds. These are humic and fulvic acids that create the body of what compost is. And think about compost as, I call it the ATM because it has nutrients and all kinds of wonderful things for the soil that don't let go the first day. They let go maybe a year, 2 years, maybe 2.5 years later before they give everything up. And they create a substrate that holds on to moisture during drought. And if you put any fertilizer down, it holds on to that longer so the plants have it for more time to get the job done. So here's the common composting problems that you're going to have. The piles fail to heat or decompose. You have uneven temperatures. You get odors, flies, and other scavengers. You can have leachate and you can have a fire, which is more common in the arid Southwest. So when the piles fail to heat, it's usually because they're too dry or they're too wet. If they're too dry, no microbial activity. If they're too wet, they can't breathe. Okay. If the mixture is not uniform, once again, an issue. Or if it's too wet and dense, it's not going to breathe. So the way you fix it, give it a turn, remix it. If it's really, really wet, work in some dry stuff. Sometimes you get the uneven ones. This is often done with a front end loader. This is where you build the pile as you're going, and one mix is not as good as the other. And the way you fix that is the section that's not doing its job, just remix it. That's the benefit of using a windrow turn on a loader, is you can make adjustments on the fly. But once again, you don't have as much space as the other ones. Then you have a stabilized product. This happens for a couple reasons. I've actually had piles that will be 150 and stay that way for weeks and weeks and weeks. And the reason why is because they're too dry. What happens if you think about it, when we go out in the summertime and it's really, really hot, we sweat, right? And then that evaporation cools us down. Well, if a pile is too dry, it can't sweat. So it can't cool itself down. And what'll happen is it'll stay hotter and hotter and hotter. And in certain situations, it'll start smoldering. And that's what causes these fires, is they just get way too dry. And the way to fix that is you take an excavator, bust it open into smaller parts, and then drench it with water. Don't add water to a pile that's roaring because it just feeds it and makes it roar more. You got to break it apart first. Okay. Odors. This is my nemesis. This is a pile with a dead cow in it and wood chips. And let me tell you, as that cow broke down, it was anaerobic, and odor came shooting up through that moist area, and flies landed there and laid eggs. And one day that pile waved at me when I walked by it. All of the chips moved up and down and said, "What's happening?" So I busted in there and there were maggots galore. And the turkeys started busting these piles wide open. So I had to actually get a permit to dispatch a turkey so I would get rid of them on site. But yes, odors are a problem. But they are the number one complaint by neighbors, but they're ammonia, as I said, is a natural part of the process. But VOAs are when the pile's too wet and it goes anaerobic. And ammonia happens if it gets too dry, right? And if there's not enough amendment, then you get feedstock odors. So the end result is we cover this stuff with hot compost. That's how we deal with maggots. So I always have a pile of hot compost over here. I can put on the other pile if it's not doing well. And remember, hot compost is balanced recipe, so it's not going to upset my final product, and it's going to kill those maggots. So we talked about the reasons why ammonia happens and why you have the rotting smell as well. But either one, you can do a temporary fix by putting peat moss or finished compost on top as an odor layer. That's a quick fix. But if you want to fix the process, you've got to mix that all together. But let's say the weekend's coming and you want to go home and you've got this major odor complaint, just cover it with compost. Come back on Monday and fix the problem. Because that compost layer will act as a biofilter and the odors won't cause any more problems. Flies. They're attracted to the smells that come out of a nasty compost pile. And they lay eggs. They basically go from an egg to a full adult fly in 12 days. So that's why the minute that you see a fly laying on your pile, there's maggots everywhere. They've already laid their eggs. They're just hanging out to make sure everything's good. And that's usually due to just not proper pile management. So I hit them with a layer, usually 8 inches of hot active compost, and they're done. Anytime you upset that 12-day cycle, you take care of the problem. But this is my obscene slide, and this just shows you the process. Those two are mating. They lay all these eggs. The egg goes to a pre-pupa, to a pupa, to an adult. And it's about 12 to 24 days. Most of the stable flies, the horse flies, those are the ones that breed really quickly. This is what happens if you have a lot of maggots in your pile. Turkeys love maggots, and they will come and start digging into your pile, and it's a real problem. So the way to fix it is just to hit it with some good hot compost. So it works really good. Now, leachate, liquid loss of nutrients from your pile. Now, from a regulatory standpoint, there's pollution, groundwater issues, and all that baloney. Well, I used to lead with that back when I was a regulator, and it never got any friends. When I went to the people and said, here's the deal, you're losing these nutrients, so your compost is not as good as it could be. And you're not going to get as much money for it as you could get. All of a sudden, they were like, what can I do to fix it? I say, sop it up and put it back in. So get a little finished compost, sop it up, put it back in. And all of a sudden, I went from regulator to reducator and said, you know what? I like that side of the coin better. So it worked out pretty good. So the key is just making sure that if you have excessive loss of moisture, sop it up and put it back in the pile as early as possible. Fire. Fire is an issue. The only ones in Maine that we've ever really seen are mulch piles. Like MB Bark down in Auburn, they've had very massive piles that will catch on fire. But we don't usually get it in our compost piles because they don't get dry enough. Even in August, we have too much humidity. But in New Mexico and Arizona, I've seen it happen. And they have a protocol. They have a whole fire protocol where they take it, break it down, drench it. The fire department comes, takes care of everything. And they actually have fire breaks between their windrows because it's such a big deal and an importance to them. But fortunately, we haven't had those issues. And then really the key thing is just why chase shadows. Figure out what you want to do and how you want to do it, and make sure that whatever process you choose, you follow exactly, and always feel free and not afraid to call with questions. There is no stupid question in this business. I've been asked, people have said, I've got a stupid question I want to ask you, and it's been a really smart question. So don't misjudge yourself. Call for help. And this is my material, my phone number, and I'm more than happy to answer any calls anytime. And I think that's it, Vic.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Any questions from the audience? And I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Yes, ma'am.
One question, I had thought that also to help with flies, if you put, coating of lime powder on top.
Okay.
In compost, is that still
Yes,
acceptable?
you can do that. The problem with lime is any pH adjuster, a little bit goes a long ways. And what people will do is they'll cover the whole thing in lime, and then it actually kills the activity. When you have an issue with flies, it's better to turn it or cover it with a hot active compost. In your case, on the food, what I would suggest is you keep a bunch of the leaf and yard compost that you don't sell just to cover. If you smother them, that's going to be the same as putting the hot active compost on them. So, but yeah, pH adjustment is a delicate thing with compost. A little bit goes, I'd say put your peppers on your mashed potatoes, just enough for the taste. Yes. Any other questions? All right. You guys survived number 4.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, go for it. Yes. Okay. So we're going to do the video of the demonstrations. We're going to do that May, do we say 11th or 12th? All right. Yep. So, yep. And so we're going to do that. Then you're going to have all 5. And the test itself is going to be 50 questions. It's free of charge to take. And so it's more of a test. It's a self-evaluation, basically, of what you learned. No, it's online. And the thing about it is that if you fail it, you can take it again and again and again until you get the achieve. Because my whole idea is not to penalize you for failing, but to give you a chance to not fail. Then at that point, if you want to get certified, you'll do it through Victor's group, and the certification is good for life. And we're going to give you, as part of that, we're going to give you a little thumb drive that's going to include all you need to do to start a community compost operation. I'm going to put a presentation on how to start a community compost operation on it for you to use. You're going to get a thermometer. And of course, the most coveted thing of all is a Maine master community composter decal that you can put on your vehicle. These are only going to be people that are certified. So be kind of a special club. And the idea is not to generate income, is to create a buzz. And I want more people to see that sticker and go, wow, how do you do that? And because the more communities we get to do this composting, even at small scale, I now have multiple facilities giving me large capacity. And that's really what we hope to do before 2030. So, cool. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Go back on your website and sign up, and then I can watch the videos that you've already done.
Correct. All three are up there right now. So you just go on the MRA. Oh, go ahead, Vic. You want to tell her?
Oh yeah, you can actually go to the website, go find the FRC part, and you don't have to sign up. You can just start watching them. You can go home right now, watch them in the car. Well, don't do that.
Mark, for watching them, it's a test.
Right. Yeah. And the thing is that I want people to enjoy the class, and I want them to really feel good about what they're doing. And then they might be inspired. I know, like, Olivia is going to go to, she does a bunch of communities. She's part of Kennebec Valley Council of Governments. So she's going to go to her communities and find out who's interested and hold workshops. And that's, I'm not expecting everybody to do the same thing, but if you can start one in your own community or so that's what we're hoping for. And to get a permit by rule, which is to allow you to compost a large bulk amount of leaf and yard, you need a degree in technical ability in order to get that permit. And this certificate serves as that. You won't need to show anything but that to get your technical ability.
I've been many years.
Okay.
And actually this year I'm experimenting. Have you ever heard of Johnson Sioux bioreactors?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And hot and
Yep.
And that pile that doesn't get turned. And the idea is that the fungal community then also has a chance to grow, which is helpful for growing food.
Right. Initially, especially, they break the lignin and the cellulose and hemicellulose down. Yeah. Oh, good. All right. Great. Well, I hope everybody takes the test, and if you choose to get certified, that's even better. But I want people to take that test and feel good about themselves, that they've learned something. So, cool. All right.
Just stop sharing for a second. I'll just show real quick where they find that.
Oh, yes, that sounds great. All right. Stop sharing right now. All right, Vic, you should be